Welcome to Connection Point. I am your president, Allen Orr, and today we're joined by the new executive director of the American Immigration Council, Jeremy. Welcome.
Thank you, Allen.
So today we're going to sort of talk about the merger and what it means to AILA. So Jeremy, what does this exciting merger? So tell us about the merger and tell us what it means to the members.
Yeah, thank you, Allen. And so for members I don't know, I've spent the last decade helping build and lead an organization called New American Economy. It was an organization founded by Michael Bloomberg to try and make this economic case for immigration, and then try to go to communities to put that into practice, help communities invest deeply in welcoming immigrants and integrating immigrants. And a lot of that work has been led by AILA lawyers. And when starting to think a couple of years ago about what happens as the presidential race was kicking up, what happens in a new administration, one of the things that kept coming back is that this fight is only getting harder. And we need more scale, we need deeper investments, we need new tools in our tool belt. And we started thinking about, all right, well, how do we get that? Taking a page out of business, we started thinking about, well, could we do a merger? There really aren't a lot of nonprofit mergers, but there should be. And when we started thinking and started gaming out, the American Immigration Council was the obvious choice for having a huge network of lawyers around the country, for having an ability to both help empower immigrants, but also make communities more welcoming. And in every way, when we looked at it, it was the ideal fit. Right? We had a research team that crunched data at New American Economy. The American Immigration Council had a transparency team that sued the government to get data. Right? We were working in 100 communities across the country with a really close overlap to AILA chapters and really active AILA chapters, trying to help communities get involved. We'd have local groups led by the business community, by the nonprofit community, by the mayor's office, and AILA community lawyers in city after city were playing a prominent role in that. And as we did that work, and we started thinking about this merger, and we started talking with the council about it, the greatest asset by far was the relationship with AILA, was the ability to really deepen the investment with the chapters, to help lift up the AILA leaders around the community as sort of the guides of this work, both, I think, helping build their brand, but also really helping communities figure out how can we help immigrants. And so that was the linchpin of why we did it. And as I look forward, I think one of the things I am most excited about over the next year and beyond is how do we really understand from the chapters what their level of engagement with the American Immigration Council wants to be, and how do we support them in their business, in their public-facing persona, and in so many other ways.
Well, that's really exciting because I think, as many people know outside of DC, everything happens at the local level, and people need to be able to explain the local level. So it looks like we're going to get better data and definitely a better media team to help explain what immigration is and what it is not and what belonging really is. So we're super excited about that. So in that growth, as an AILA member, we're used to seeing policy briefs from the council. We're used to the great litigation. What else can we sort of see with this new edition of this merger coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that we work really hard on is storytelling, right? I mean, immigration lawyers are the heroes of the last 5 years. There is this attack on immigrants. The system has gotten harder, the budget cuts and delays and the pandemic. Your clients are frustrated. It's difficult to practice this. How do we lift that up? So at New American Economy, we have a team of 7 journalists, and they help tell that story. They tell the story of lawyers and their clients who are fighting to make a better life here. And so the ability to really build that, I think, is important for the movement. I think it's also important for lawyers as they try and talk about their own practice and build their brand. So I think that's one. The second is in these efforts around the country, in these 100 communities, where we are trying to start an Office of New Americans, help people get access to English, help people naturalize. We need leaders at the table locally to drive that, and the chapters are a natural home for that. And then similarly, as we're doing the work and really pushing on the federal government to act, as you said, all politics is local. No one cares what anyone outside their district says, except for maybe what they're getting in the media. But so how can we really use advocacy, use the press, and use policy driven by local lawyers? I think that's what we're focusing on, and that's what we want to explore.
That's excellent. And so could you tell us what's your passion? What drove you to this fight?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I grew up in New York City, in sort of the world's great immigrant city. And immigration was the lifeblood of the city. And personally, I mean, I come from a line of shtetl Jews who were who come from towns that don't exist anymore because of pogroms, and found a way to come here, which is not open to people, most poor people in the world, but it was 100 years ago, and they came, and were able to find success in a community that embraced them. And I think about growing up, how much of my life, my experience now with two kids, their experience is made more fulfilling and better by the fact that we live in a diverse community where people bring different perspectives and different cultures, and then you look at how broken the system is, and how much even my own story is only possible because of what I look like and our unique circumstances, and how unfair the system is to so many people. And so 10 years ago, when I was thinking of a younger lawyer and thinking about what to do with my career, I had the option to go work for Michael Bloomberg when he was mayor in New York City. And at the time, he was working on a host of really interesting things. He was working on gay marriage. He was working on gun policy. He was working on pension reform. He was working on financial crimes and truancy and all these really interesting issues. But he also was just starting this idea for doing something on immigration. And that spoke to me. I mean, it spoke to me as something that was so needed, I think, in this debate. I think he had a really interesting angle for it. It was an environment where you could take risks and build something from scratch. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have spent the last decade working with unbelievably creative and talented people, taking on a very, very hard problem that some days it's unclear if we're making progress, and other days it feels like you see how much of America we're winning over. And I think the parts that we haven't won over yet, I think, are more entrenched than ever. But it's the right fight to be in. And so I feel very fortunate to be able to do this every day.
That's why I'm super excited. A lot of the members are really challenged at this point in their practice because they're exhausted. They're exhausted from fighting the last administration. They're exhausted from fighting this administration. Actually running an immigration practice can be challenging if you're doing detention centers and things aren't open. And so for part of the COVID spell, people weren't able to make money, and they sort of feel a little bit under the weather. For an immigration attorney is not the hero anymore. It's sort of the side job. We're the bus drivers. And so how do you feel, or where do you see immigration attorneys? I mean, you sort of said they're the frontline people in these local communities, but how do you sort of feel will be the long drive, the long angle for those attorneys with your organization in the different aspects, right? Because you'll have many things going on.
Yeah, it's a great thing. I mean, it is hard. I mean, I'm telling people, people know this, like, it's hard to run an immigration practice, right? I mean, in so many ways, and from the business angle, it's hard. From the emotional angle, you empty a bed and then someone else is in that bed. It's sort of like you sometimes feel like you're bailing water. And then when the government is broken, your clients are blaming you because of the delays. And so we hear that, and it beats you down. And I think one of the positive things that started to happen, I think you're right, we have to make sure it doesn't slip, is over the last 5 years that hero narrative started to take form in a real way. I mean, after the Muslim ban, I live in Brooklyn. And the case was held, the TRO was at the courthouse right by my apartment, and I went to be outside, and there's a huge mass of people, and they're protesting, and then the lawyers arrived, and the crowds parted, and the shouts went up, and it was they were the heroes in a way, and so how do we tell that story? Because it's hard to be on the front lines, and when I think about the work that we're doing, if you want the system to work, if you want to represent immigrants, part of that is making sure that you're supporting the people who are doing that. And that comes in a lot of forms. I mean, it comes in really helping people build their brand so that they can be better advocates and better lawyers and have more of a business. It also comes with recognizing that we have to be careful about what we ask of people. It's really hard when someone's life, they're so swamped in their life and emotionally, physically taxed to go and say, oh yeah, now we need you to speak at this event or to donate when you're already stretched. And so we want to be cognizant of that. And so how do we ask enough that we have people leading this fight for change without being too demanding on people who already have so many asks upon them?
Well, that feels really well as a member of AILA and as someone who's in that challenge. It really sits well with me. And that's ultimately always amazing. What do you sort of see as happening in immigration for the next year? Where do you see it moving, or do you see it not moving at all? How do you sort of feel the landscape is?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's challenging, and it's so hard to predict what's going to happen in DC, and we spend our whole day trying to think about what's going to happen. And I mean, we're going to know in the next bit, certainly by the time this launches, what happened with the parliamentarian. But the reality is there's so much that will happen at the state and local level. We're going into an election year, and when people think about immigration elections, they tend to think about it as this idea of, well, what should we say? What should the message be? when I think a lot of the question is about, is the message going to land, right? That immigration is only an election issue if you're able to fearmonger with it. And so the more that we can over the next year really lift up stories about how we're all in this together, about the role that immigrants are playing in these communities, not just economically, but socially and culturally as well, it makes it really hard. The more that we can actually have efforts to make people know immigrants. I mean, one thing that Wendy Felice from the council team talks about a lot is that only about a third of Americans know an immigrant. And that's a problem when you think about how siloed we are. And so how do you change that? Because it's really hard to be anti-immigrant if you know immigrants. I mean, one of the interesting things about the data is that the places that are the most anti-immigrant in the country aren't the places where there are lots of immigrants, right? It's a place where immigrants are just starting to come, and it's scary because it's different. And so how can we, over the next year, actually try to make some inroads in that? And I think that's another one where the local chapters, I mean, you know all the stories. You're leaders in the community. How do we lift those up? How do we make sure that we're creating opportunities to change what it means to be an immigrant in these communities?
That's super important, to empower us at the local level, to give the communications in the way that may land with the communities that we're in, because we're also, we do immigration 24/7, so we don't know the other side of it. I think that's super important. So now that we know more about the merger and we know more about the council, let's learn a little bit about you. What's your favorite book?
Oh, what a great question. So there's a wonderful book called The Confederacy of Dunces that I was given when I was 20 years old by one of my best friends who is now a literature professor, and she's much more highbrow than I am. So when she gives me, I'm like, I'm never gonna like this book. And it's a satire, and it is, I think of it all the time. And whenever it's sort of the yardstick against when I measure. I'm reading right now an absolutely fascinating book called America in Iran, which is about the last 200 years of the relationship between America and Iran, but told not from the American perspective and not from the Iranian perspective, but from both. And so really trying to understand the history. I mean, when you think about in that one, that if you ask Americans about the history with Iran, the story starts in 1979. If you ask Iranis, it starts in 1953. That we don't even have the same facts. And so I think it's just in this debate too, when we think about immigration, it's so much about like, how do we even put this in a language where we can talk to each other? And so those are.
That's great. So this is our 75th year anniversary that's coming to a close. We started in New York City. You're from New York City, so it sounds like a marriage made in heaven. So to close this out, what's your favorite sort of movie? What's your favorite movie to sort of?
Oh, that's funny. So movies, I go through this phase where as someone with fairly lowbrow tastes, I love period pieces and dramas and cop shows, and I've gotten to a place where these are not movies, but where at the end of the day, I mean, we're all so burned out. We're all working so hard. Where I've started watching, Netflix has this thing where they know, right? As we all know from the algorithm, they know what you like, and they've realized what I like is the same show in every different language. So I will watch the cop procedural in Spanish, and then I'll watch it in the same similar version, the period show in French, and then in Turkish, and then in Korean. And so I realized that I've been typecast as someone who really needs the procedural drama in my life.
Well, that's super exciting. So we welcome you here. We're so excited to have you, and we're looking forward to a successful relationship. So thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. And I will say that I've already learned a lot from you, and I really am looking forward to the relationship with AILA, and particularly with the chapters, to learn what they need and how we can support. Like, we want it to be a two-way street. I think there's so much that we are trying to be here in a way that really does help immigrants, and that really does change the conversation around immigration in America. And that really starts with learning from the people who live and breathe this.